well. So it's really early morning for them, and I'm really thankful that they could join us today. So our session today will focus on an interesting topic. It's on sanitation, and most of you has already questioned me how sanitation is related to climate change impacts. So just a quick overview. For countries like Bangladesh and any other small island developing states or countries in Africa, sanitation and water infrastructure or water sanitation hygiene always is in the front line of climate change impacts. And that is a big problem for the poor communities who are in the brunt of the climate change impacts. And these infrastructures are usually hard hit first, and usually oftentimes for this particular reasons, we have seen a couple of problems such as health related problems, or people tend to move from those particular areas. So due to those issues, organizations like ours, WaterAid and Institute of Development Studies, and our another organization, Rupanto, we have been jointly working to figure out the climate change impacts that effectively are causing problems to the sanitation sector, and particularly in the water sanitation and hygiene. And secondly, we're looking into how we can figure out to solve those particular problems, especially in the light of locally led adaptation practices. So with that, before we give the floor to Dr. Hawk, Rezan, can I just quickly request you to take a screenshot?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. So we have three presenters who will walk you through the climate change impact and how we're solving it. Then we have two amazing panelists from DORP and WaterAid UK. And before we go into listening their amazing insights, I will request Dr. Hawk to do the opening remarks. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adnan, and good morning. Assalamu alaikum to everybody from Dhaka. Thank you for inviting me. I'm assuming framing remarks for your discussion, and I want to apologize for not being able to speak, unfortunately. But basically, the issue of water and also sanitation and hygiene are particularly important in the context of impacts of climate change. Very often in the mitigation sector, in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it is very closely associated with issues related to energy, because most of our energy still comes from fossil fuels like coal, petroleum, or natural gas. Similarly, on the adaptation side of the equation, we can say almost the same about water and sanitation and hygiene as well. These are also extremely linked to adaptation, and impacts of climate change will be significantly adversely affecting the water sector broadly and the sanitation and hygiene sector more specifically. And we are going to have to deal with that. We are going to have to adapt to it. But also, we will not be able to adapt to everything. There will certainly be some level of impacts that we will be unable to avoid or unable to anticipate, and we are going to have to deal with them once the impacts happen. Now, that it takes us from the territory of what we call adaptation to a new and emerging territory called loss and damage from climate change. And unfortunately, I say that we have entered the era of loss and damage from climate change that's attributable to human-induced climate change, and we are going to have to deal with it. And you will notice in the Gobeshona conference this year, we have a number of sessions that are addressing local aspects of loss and damage, which sort of segues from adaptation to once the impacts happen, then we are not adapting anymore. We are now recovering from the loss and damage caused by those impacts. And that is now, unfortunately, increasingly taking place around the world, including here in Bangladesh. And so the experience of locally led adaptation then segues very neatly into locally led loss and damage, addressing loss and damage as well. And we need to be thinking about that. And one final aspect of thinking about loss and damage in particular, and I would recommend anybody who's interested in that to identify the sessions on loss and damage. We have a number of them, including this evening in Dhaka at 6 p.m. Bangladesh time. We will be doing one, and there are others over the next few days that you might want to participate in. But in this context of this meeting and this session, an important part of the loss and damage agenda relates to something called climate justice or climate injustice. And increasingly, there is a movement on climate justice around the world, particularly in the developed countries, but also in the developing countries, in the global south, particularly by young people. The youth are very active on climate justice issues. So if you take the framing of climate justice or climate injustice, then it maps onto what we in the climate change jargon call loss and damage from climate change, because these are losses and damages suffered by people because of the impacts of human-induced climate change. And the most affected and the first affected are the people, the poorest people living in the developing countries. And just to cite just a few examples from the last few days, the island of Vanuatu in the Pacific got hit by 2 successive cyclones within a matter of days, and they're totally devastated. They're still devastated at the moment. At the same time, across the Indian Ocean, the hurricane Freddie hit the island of Madagascar, crossed Madagascar, and then hit the coast of Africa, the countries of Mozambique and Malawi, and then it bounced back into the sea and is going to hit them again. They've already been hit once. They are going to be hit again today or tomorrow by Hurricane Freddie. It's the longest lasting hurricane that we have ever seen on planet Earth. It continues. It doesn't stop. Normally hurricanes stop once they hit land, but this one is not stopping. And so that is an example of the things that are going to come in this new era of losses and damages from climate change. And we have to be prepared. Nobody is prepared. We're going to have to become prepared as quickly as possible. And I hope that this session will help us make that transition from adaptation to loss and damage at the local level in Bangladesh, but also in other countries as well. I'll stop there, Adnan. Hand over to you.
Hi, Adnan, you're muted.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Ruhil. Thank you, sir, for your amazing insights. It's always good to hear from you. So people who are joining, my name is Adnan Kader. I work with WaterAid Bangladesh. I'll be moderating today's session. So for moving along, we have some amazing presentations from researchers who have been closely working with us regarding to solve and figure out solutions to sanitation-related issues. And as Dr. Haq mentioned, infrastructures and communities in the front line of climate change impacts are always struggling with this first. So we have Ruhil Iyer, our research officer working with the Institute of Development Studies. She has a plethora of experience working in India and currently in Bangladesh as well. She focuses her research on sanitation in particular, especially equity, access to vulnerability with local communities. So Ruhil, the floor is yours. Please do share your insights working with us. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Adnan. Can I request for the slide to move to the next slide, please? So hello, everybody. Welcome to our session. I hope you find it insightful and is a good opportunity for learning. Like Adnan said, my name is Ruhil. I work on a project called the Sanitation Learning Hub at the Institute of Development Studies. And today I'm just going to be very briefly outlining some of our research findings from and around the impact of climate on rural sanitation and hygiene more specifically. Next slide, please. So yeah, just to dive straight in, So how can poor sanitation impact climate resilience? And we found that it can do in lots of multiple pathways. It risks damage to infrastructure. So the risk of unsafely managed sanitation leads to the spread of fecal pathogens, which means all of those fecal-oral transmission routes become a big hazard. Fecal pathogens can then contaminate crops, lead to various diseases like cholera, and then also have generally reduced hygiene standards within villages and communities. Like I said, it puts people at risk of disease and debt with hospital bills, and it really reduces people's ability and capacity to cope in the immediate term, but then also invest in more longer term resilience building projects and abilities. Like I said, the infrastructure also gets, previous slide, please. Like I said, the infrastructure also gets compromised. So latrines will get damaged, households will get damaged, and then people get increasingly vulnerable if these are not appropriately designed. In these situations, there's also an impact on people's livelihoods. So crop damage, animal and cattle will get washed away. So then there's less scope for people to be able to invest in sanitation and hygiene when they are more concerned about their own livelihoods. Within all of this, vulnerable groups, people with enduring marginalized access to various essential services, including sanitation, they are most likely to be negatively impacted. And then this therefore exacerbates inequities and reducing their capacity for long-term sustained transformative change. Again, recalling a lot of what Dr. Huck said about climate injustice. Next slide, please. Even though climate impacts can reduce and negatively impact sanitation hygiene access, managing good sanitation can also boost climate resilience. So research has shown that with regard to very effective or most effective actions to reduce vulnerability in the short term, public health measures, one of which is sanitation, can alleviate poverty, and the IPCC has very high confidence in that. In the sanitation sector, and particularly in rural, we have a long history of trying to identify and reach the most vulnerable and address structural inequalities like gender, social marginalization, etc. We're very strong in targeting these inequities, reaching who are most left behind. So we can use this within the climate space as well. And then also embedding climate risk and ways to identify previous and ongoing impacts within sanitation programming can help address poverty alleviation and help also reduce inequalities also within sanitation programming. So there's a few opportunities that we have with regard to sanitation to target climate resilience. Next slide, please. But within all of this, gaps still persist. We're forced to ensure that sanitation is able to fit into the adaptation mitigation rhetoric, but within all of that, technology and hardware solutions seem to be more prioritized. Because of this, then the solution to the climate and sanitation problem is very expensive. Instead of being locally, so by that I mean household, village, ward, district level, locally driven and focused. Again, recalling to the climate justice and argument, voices of people who are struggling, who are at the front line, their narratives don't normally drive these discussions. And also, we've received very, very little climate finance in the WASH sector because there's lots of talk around not enough links being drawn between climate impacts and sanitation. even with research, a lot of the impacts are focused on urban sanitation and extreme events like flooding, etc. And also focused on the impact on sewage systems, not so much on decentralized, complex, fragmented systems that we have in countries like India, Bangladesh, South Asia, African countries. There's some research into circular economy and mitigation ideas. So how sanitation can potentially be a silver bullet towards helping with mitigation. And there's some research on, again, the impacts of floods. So, but like I said, within all of this, rural sanitation remains a big gap. Next slide, please. So what we found is that climate impacts, climate hazards, climate change affects sanitation and hygiene in several numerous interlinking pathways. These are complex because they're driven by individual experiences, but then also dynamic as they change over time, and then cross-cutting because they cut through various intersectional vulnerabilities, and then also non-linear because there's no one straight trajectory towards these impacts. Different people experience these impacts according to their specific circumstances of where they live, the distance between them and their toilet, their financial capacity to cope, where they live even within a village, whether they are low-lying areas or higher-lying areas, and then their general social marginalization, so their race, caste, religion, etc. All of this is then also guided by ongoing local activities that can make these hazards feel worse, and then also their own activities around livelihoods. So what we need really is for actionable ideas to understand, and then also actionable ideas to respond to climate change and climate impacts on sanitation, both within sanitation and WASH programs, and then also the inclusion of WASH and sanitation related concerns within climate oriented programs. Next slide, please. In some research, we undertook a year in 2020 now, actually. We asked what was stopping sanitation programming from and sanitation programmers from investing and focusing on climate thinking and climate concerns within programming. And we saw that there were gaps on multiple levels. So people perceived the climate problem as something slow developing. They saw this as a big concern that was multi-sectoral and therefore not just limited to sanitation, and lots of other people therefore needed involving, which became more complex. They saw climate as something with lots of diagrams, graphs, and data and technical terms, which made things confusing and difficult to engage in. Ongoing sanitation programming is already very complex, so it's much harder to include more additional components. We focus a lot on sustainability and sustained access and use within the sanitation sector, but without realizing that climate impacts is actually one of the big reasons why sustainability might not be possible. And the direct links between climate and sanitation, like I said, are unclear. Insufficient evidence have been linked so far. Lots of uncertainty. People didn't know how rural sanitation would be specifically affected in their context. And then stopping engagement and responses. It was seen as a big problem to be handled at like national level with these ministries and within conversations at high-level meetings and summits. And it was seen as a biophysical problem, so something scientists would be involved in. It was seen as a global problem, so not something related to their specific ward, district, locality. And then also within the sanitation sector at the time, and to some extent so far, even now as well, we had very specific and reduced amount of actionable guidance. It was either on, say, very specific guidance like how building toilets in areas with high water tables. There was not much on thinking through what it would mean for a program cycle and to think of it more holistically within an entire program. And like I said, climate finance was also a big thing because we were not prioritized within climate finance. So in order to build some evidence and address the barriers and galvanize people in the WASH sector to start working, we decided to embark on the development of 3 case study processes to specifically and explicitly establish the link of climate impacts on sanitation and hygiene in various contexts. So we've been doing this in Burkina Faso with UNICEF, in Laos with SNV, and then also with WaterAid in Bangladesh. We specifically wanted to support and encourage rural practitioners and government to add a climate lens to the existing sanitation programming. Make sure that our focus was not just on having open defecation-free villages and districts, but then also having safely managed villages and districts. And then also ensure that our focus was on understanding the impacts of vulnerable people, putting people and households and communities at the center of programming and let them drive our decision making. Next, please. So on this, so today in the following presentations, I'm hoping that our colleagues will be focusing on Bangladesh specifically, and I'm very excited to hear Samiha's presentation on all the work we've been doing on participatory vulnerability and its analysis on sanitation in Bangladesh. So enjoy.
Thank you so much, Ruhil, for that amazing insight, and rightly so. Sanitation linkages are often missed out, but when we do the research, we are seeing that sanitation impacts largely affect the climate vulnerable groups in most of the countries we have talked about. And it's really important to highlight those notions with the experts, policymakers who are present here today, also the attendees. And for WaterAid, it has been an amazing journey working with IDS as Sanitation Learning Hub. We have used one of our own tools to understand the vulnerability, especially linking it to sanitation. And we call that process the participatory wall vulnerability assessment. And we have an amazing speaker from WaterAid who will be walking you through the process itself and some of the findings. Samiha is a researcher plus an associate officer with WaterAid in the heart of our climate resilience program, and she'll be walking you through the rest of the presentation. Samiha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adnan bhai, for giving me the floor, and thanks to all the participants for joining in our sessions. So I'm here to talk about some of the major findings we have observed from one of our studies, which was supported by Sanitation Learning Hub from Institute of Development Studies. And the study was actually implemented by our implementing organization, Panther. So the process is known as participatory ward vulnerability assessment. I'll detail it out a bit more in my presentation today. So next slide, please. The area we selected for this study is known as Krishnanagar Union. It is situated in the southwest coast of Bangladesh, which is very much close to the Bay of Bengal and world's largest mangrove forest, Sundarban. The area has a huge diversity of people from different religion and ethnicity, and most of them are involved in fishing and farming as their professions. Unfortunately, we observed that the wash facilities that people are using in that area is very unimproved, and it's quite similar to other hard-to-reach unions of Bangladesh, which are situated in the southwest coastal belt of the country. And in terms of Krishnanagar, we have seen a wide number of climate hazard being persistent in the area, which includes salinity, cyclone, and heavy rainfall. And in the picture of the slide, you can see one of the landscape of the area. The picture was taken during winter, and you can see how much the land has been destroyed due to salinity and fish farming in the area. Next slide, please. So in our study, we had three major research questions. The first question is, what is the present status of wash facilities in our selected study site? The second research questions involves how climate hazards are impacting water sanitation and hygiene practices in rural Bangladesh, specifically in Krishnanagar Union of Satkhira district. And the third research question is, what actions can be undertaken by different stakeholders to address the ongoing issues related to water sanitation and hygiene. Next slide, please. So the method we adopted, as Adnan mentioned, it is one of WaterAid's own developed method known as Participatory Ward Vulnerability Assessment, or PWVA in short. It was developed in 2013 by our organization, and later it has been recently modified a bit with the support from Sanitation Learning Hub. And the method has 10 steps, and it has both qualitative and quantitative data collection tool, and it is implemented at the lowest tier of administrative boundary in Bangladesh. So we actually collected ward level information from our selected study site, as well as analyzed the information. We believe the information relating wash and climate change will be useful for local government institutes, government and non-government agencies, as well as for development practitioners who are interested to work on wash and climate change in southwest coast of the country. Next slide, please. So the qualitative data collection was held through community consultation process, and we had 18 such consultation involving a lot of people comprising women and also people from different marginalized community, such as Munda community, which is one of the most marginalized ethnic community of the country. In this community consultation process, we developed a lot of different documents, including social maps of the wards, seasonal calendar of wash problems, and we also formulated a comprehensive ward development plan based on the opinion of our participants. On top of this, we newly added some focus group discussions with a focus on menstrual hygiene management. This is a recent addition in our formerly developed PWVA process, and we developed the focus group discussions with the support from Sanitation Learning Hub. We also developed data at 3 different tiers, including ward level validation workshops, union level validation, and upazila level validation workshops. Besides, our quantitative data was collected at a census level, and the data we collected was mostly focused on wash and climate impacts in our study area. Next slide, please. In terms of climate hazard, we have learned from our participants that they have observed a change in the unique seasonal pattern over the past few decades. In addition, they have also opined that the frequency and intensity of different climate hazards, especially cyclone and storm surge, have increased over the past decades. Relating to sanitation, we found that most of the people falls under the category of basic sanitation facilities, while the data was categorized as per the GMP ladder, and approximately 80% population has sanitation facilities, which falls under basic sanitation facility category as per GMP ladder. There are several direct impacts of climate change on sanitation in our study location, and those involved inundation of sanitation infrastructures due to waterlogging, overflooded drainage, and also the toilet pits are filling very fast, especially during the monsoon season because of the heavy rainfall. Aside from this, the accessibility to market and resources are also hampered, especially during the moments of disaster. And we have also learned that those impacts are felt more strongly by communities who are most marginalized, or especially women and children are suffering the most out of these different impacts of climate change on sanitation. We have also seen some indirect impacts of climate change on sanitation, and the most prominent impact is inadequacy of safe water sources. It's because due to increasing salinity, we have seen that most of the freshwater sources are turning to be saline, and as a result, due to inadequacy of non-saline sources, people are also facing difficulties to manage their sanitation practices, especially in terms of cleanliness and also for maintenance. And because of poor water and sanitation facilities in the area, a huge share of the people are suffering from poor hygiene practices, especially in terms of menstruation. We have seen that it's getting even more difficult to maintain menstruation because of the poor infrastructure and poor accessibility to sanitation facilities. Another aspect of climate impacts on sanitation is that the livelihood opportunities are shrinking over the period. For example, agricultural production has reduced drastically, which is minimizing household investment on sanitation. And all these are ultimately leading to different environmental hazards as well as health hazards in the area. So based on our observations and based on our understanding of local adaptation principles, we have certain recommendations which will be useful to overcome the challenges we have observed in terms of sanitation facilities. Firstly, we have observed that the sanitation programming is decided based on the decisions of the regulating authority or the government agencies, but we haven't seen much involvement of the community members in the decision-making process. So if the community members are involved in the process, they would have better suggested what should be more context-specific, what would have been more appropriate for upgrading the sanitation situation in the area. Also, we have seen that women and the indigenous community, as I mentioned about the Munda community, they do not have much participation in sanitation programming, especially in terms of sanitation facility construction. Their perceptions are not much incorporated in most of the cases. That's why we found that there is a huge inequality persistent in the area, which should be addressed for more inclusive sanitation programming in the area. Aside from this, we have learned that during the post-disaster period, a major repairing of the sanitation facility is needed, which is quite difficult for communities, especially for the low-income communities of our study area. So if there was any easily accessible funding scope for them, it would have been more easier to repair the latrines right after the disaster. In addition, there should be increased investment on local capacity building, especially for local enterprises and caretakers, so that they can understand more about climate resilient sanitation programming and can incorporate those practices and can modify their existing practices to be more climate resilient. And the local stakeholders should also have a better understanding on climate sanitation linkages. So we have seen that especially the Union Porishad Authority or some of the local government agencies like DPHLGD, they often construct sanitation facilities which are not that inclusive to climate perspective. So if they had better understanding on the climate sanitation linkages, it would have been more easier for the community to avail the facilities, especially during the ever-rising frequency of climate hazards. The sanitation facility should also be flexible and very much context-specific, which we see very relevant to our study area. So for every construction of sanitation facility, we should address the climate hazards appropriately so that, especially during the time of disaster, there is no hampered accessibility to those sanitation facilities. Also, there are scopes to upgrade the sanitation programming scheme to be more transparent and accountable, with increased collaborative actions and collaborative investment on sanitation programming. Especially, we have seen that there are scopes for private sector engagement, and this can be taken into consideration by the local stakeholders and also the local stakeholders who are involved in different private companies. So based on our observation, we found that all the local-led adaptation principles can actually improve the persisting sanitation programming situation even better. So I hope you have found my discussion quite interesting. But to learn more about the grassroots context, we have another speaker from Kaliganj, who is actually working for a long time in our study area. And that's all from my end. Over to Adnan bhai. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Samia, for those amazing insights, especially on the locally led recommendations. I hope the audience who are here from the different sectors and fields can take away some learning from our end. At the same time, Samia touched base something on the JMP ladder. JMP ladder is something we use in the water sector often. It is a ladder recommended by WHO and UNICEF, especially to understand to what extent and to what extent the communities we're working with are getting safely managed, improved basic services. And that's a holistic way to measure to what extent some communities have proper services in contrast to communities who don't have proper services. Moving along, we have a third speaker from Shapkira, who has been working closely with us. He's a close colleague of mine, and he has been an amazing support to find and gather data for this particular research. He has amazing experience, and he's a local grassroots leader as well. Asad Bhai, the floor is yours to share your insights.
Yeah, thank you, Adnan Bhai, and also thanks to everyone. Actually, Rupantar is working for a long time in the coastal belt area, and with the support of WaterAid Bangladesh, we are implementing some programs. So this is the sanitation in a climate stressed area, and I am discussing or sharing our ground realities, our experience here. Here are different types of challenge. If we number one, availability, accessibility, quality and hygiene, quantity and functionality. This is latrines is not everywhere, and number of users are more considering the number of latrine. And also male and female chamber here is not separated in some cases. And I am also sharing another things like that at the time of disaster, the sanitation problem goes or raise acute. In the cyclone shelter, there are one or two only sanitation facilities which are not male and female are not separated. Female have to use with the male, where the number of and there the number of users are more than 1,000 or several hundred, and they have to wait in a queue. And also at the community level, I also shared that number of toilet is not sufficient, and and old people say that when we are actually working in Kaliganj Upazila in a Munda community, he actually said that open defecation was very common in the area 1 decade ago. Now the affluent people have made their own improved toilet. The poorer ones are suffering since they can neither defecate in open space due to hesitation nor make a good quality latrine. Defecating in a poorly constructed latrine is more dangerous than defecating in an open space. And in the picture, we actually found that which one is top left right side. This is a pen. This is the picture of pen which water seal is broken, and right side the bottom one. This is a unhygienic latrine, and also this one also unhygienic latrine. Next, please. Here is the there are coping mechanism. Presently people are trying to do or adapting. One is use of saline tolerant materials. Saline tolerant materials, it is use some chemicals, maybe some are Mixol Guard and Plastomix, and also people have used here tiles outside of the buildings or infrastructure, and also inside, both outside and inside. And also for construction work, sweet water is mandatory. But here in the coastal belt, sweet water is very, there is a acute crisis to get the like sweet water. But people ensure or try to ensure sweet water, even they have to buy it. And also like another asbestos sheet or cement sheet people usually use. And another coping mechanism is uplifting the plinth of the toilets, like platform usually raised high. And selection criteria, when people select their sanitation sites, they usually select the which one is high area. Yeah, next slide. Here it is like how we transform. Like here we are working with Rupantar is working with WaterAid Bangladesh, and in the context of the South Coast Bangladesh, Rupantar and WaterAid Bangladesh introduced sanitation programming is evident by here PWVA, participatory word vulnerability assessment is very we found it is very important and useful. So PWBA brings grassroots participant towards decision-making bodies through a systematic process. Sanitation interventions address inequalities through inclusive programming. Here we actually put emphasis on gender responsive, priorities toward ethnic minorities, disabilities, inclusive, etc. Like at the field level, we always consider the like gender sensitiveness and also priority to ethnic communities. Like our high priority is to work with, or first priority is to work with the ethnic minority peoples. Forms community owned and easily accessible operation and maintenance fund, which we called O&M fund, like operation and maintenance fund. It is actually created or raised by the community people for the future maintenance of the wash facility that actually ensure the sustainability of the wash facilities or wash interventions. And this amount actually made fixed deposit at their bank account, and they are a signatory from the community people, and also a representative from the local NGO or local organization. And another one next, like interventions build on local capacity. Here, like community awareness, sensitization of LGIs and capacity building, etc. Context-specific, transparent, and collaborative sanitation interventions. Here, like context-specific means like there are different types of technologies here, and the context is also different. For example, like when we are building or constructing a wash facilities, just like next to the coastal belt or river, there we consider which one will be the effective one. Like if we example like pond sand filter or rainwater harvesting system, improve sanitation like pit latrine, septic tank latrine, we consider the context. And the like transparent and collaborative sanitation interventions, like transparent at the time of implementing or constructing our projects or wash interventions, we formed like procurement committee and project implementation committee. Like procurement committee consists of procurement committee consisting of from the community And PIC also, Project Implementation Committee also consisting of community to ensure the transparency. Next slide, please. And the immediate outcome of PWVA, like participatory ward vulnerability assessment, here, firstly, it is already mentioned previously that at the Krishnanagar Union, under the Kaliganj Upazila, PWVA have been conducted. So immediate outcome was to make a report or produced a report on these activities, and also like LGIs committed budgetary implications based on the PWA findings. Like considering the PWA findings, immediately it was immediate outcome that they decided to allocate the budget, and they committed to the participant and to the community. And consolidated findings of the PWA will be handed over to LGIs. Next slide, please. And here is the concluding remarks, like with increased frequency and intensity of climate hazards, sanitation challenges are worsening. We know that actually presently the people of coastal belt is experiencing increased frequency, like years or 2 years ago, there were a super cyclone Amphan and Bulbul hit within 7 months. And also like last year, Sitrang also hit. So like not only cyclone, there are also like tidal surge, and tidal surge also happened. And next one, PWA is found to be useful to precisely access community vulnerabilities to climate hazard. I already shared that, like participative ward vulnerability, we found it is very useful because through this process, community people, like it ensures engagement of community people and their voice, and they can participate in planning and budgetary implication activities. Also, through the PWVA, community people make pressure on the like LGIs or elected bodies. Next slide, please. Thank you. It is from my side, it's fine.
Thank you so much, Asad Bhai. It's lovely, always lovely hearing from you, especially the ground level realities. So just to summarize the talk so far, we have seen the different climate impacts on sanitation facilities. My colleague from WaterAid, Samia, she walked you through what PWVA is, especially in terms of the locally led adaptation principles, how PWVA is complementing our approaches to solve sanitation related problems, and B, to garner more evidence-based approaches for the locally led adaptation principles, and especially to link climate change and sanitation, as Ruhil mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Now, we will go into our panelists. We have two amazing panelists from two different organizations. One is our own Catherine Farr, and then we have Zobair Sir from representative of Development Organization of the Rural Poor, or DOP for short. Zobair Sir, Catherine, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Adnan. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Sir,
Hi, this is Zubair.
Okay. So before I go into questions, Catherine and Sir, do you have any remarks or feedback for the presentations? If you need some clarifications, please do ask. Then I'll go into the questions. Okay, none from Catherine. Sir, do you have any questions for the presenters?
No, I think so far it went very well, and that's the three presentations were amazing because of first one is the global scenario and what we can do, the definitions and the linkage. Second one is ground reality, and the third one is really more ground and related to the implementation and some challenges. It's very good.
Okay, sir, since you have the mic, I'll start off with you. We have a question for you. In your experience working in this field for a long time, you have amazing experiences and some fruitful insights for us. Could you just explain how the WASH landscape has changed over the last couple of years, and especially how these approaches, the PWV approaches and working as a community to figure out sanitation related issues can change from your experience?
Thank you. Mr. Adnan. My name is Zubair Hassan. As you mentioned, I'm working as a DOR, which is a national NGOs. We are also implementing and also connecting with the policy discussions. And I'm also a representative of CSO constituencies in sanitation and water for all as alternative. So it was very good organizing session. And as I mentioned, that's the presenters were amazing in relation to the topic and also thematic issues and also ground implementation experience. So what you have just mentioned, or as a question that is there any change of WASH landscape due to climate change? I think before entering the this answer or discussions, what I have seen that if we connect with these three presentations with our SDGs, I think each and every indicators of SDG 6 have been connected. We know that we have only 6 years left to achieve the SDGs, and particularly SDG 6, that's the water supply, sanitation, water use efficient water use, water quality, IWRM, and people's participation. So in a nutshell, we can understand that how these issues can be related to the climate change perspective or climate justice, as at the beginning Mr. Hawk was just mentioning. In fact, if we want to connect with SDG 6 and try to connect with the climate change related to its loss and damage, then surely we need to think about that what actually we have been committed in relation to the SDG commitment, and how this has been connected with this present scenario of climate change. For example, we have heard from the presentations and also Mr. Hawk that frequency of the hurricane or the tidal bore or natural calamities have been increased, and that's really need to be considered in our WASH related activities, that whether we are preparing or engaging the government to prepare the hardware supports or hardware, then due to not considering the climate vulnerability or the climate aspects, then it can be damaged very soon, or maybe it has been not utilized properly. So this time we need to consider the SDG commitment or achievement in relation to the climate vulnerabilities. This is one. Secondly, the WASH landscape actually we can relate, or we can see if we consider or see our Water Act 2018, that there are 5 components have been clearly mentioned in our Water Act and water rules. That's first of all, that availability of the potable water. And secondly, the source of water should be coming from rainwater and also the groundwater. And and purifying those water, etc. So these components or these priorities are very much connecting to the climate change, particularly in our country context. If we see the southwest and south belt are very much vulnerable in relation to this situation, and there are 19 districts are very much directly affected. So it has been changing from groundwater to the surface water. It means that we put or we constructed huge or we installed the huge tube wells for having our groundwater as a water source. But now we need to think about the use of surface water, and that has been clearly mentioned in the Water Act and water rules. So that change we can see. So I think if we consider the SDG 6 under this SDG 6, 4, 5 indicators, that can help us a lot to prepare the proper policy and plan accordingly and implement the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for those last three remarks about how we can integrate these approaches into our national policies. And it's very important and rightly to do so because we are increasingly seeing those impacts change. And it's hard to catch up with it because the climate impacts are increasingly so much so, as Dr. Hawk mentioned at the beginning. At this point, I'll ask a question to Catherine regarding on those 3 points. Catherine, we have been working on locally led actions for some time now. How do you see us incorporating as WaterAid or any other institution? How can we incorporate participatory research to highlight sanitation issues to national policies? If you could share your 2 cents with us, that would be amazing.
Thanks, Adnan. This has been such a great session so far. I'm really pleased to be able to join all of you today. Yeah, it's a really good question. How do we engage it? And I think that the presentations talked a lot about not only how we can do it, but some of the challenges that we need to consider. And one of those challenges, as Rahil said, is that with climate impacts becoming more frequent, there's a push at the global level to view this as a high level, whether that's national, international, and the push for funding to go with actions that work at scale. So the desire to kind of put money towards something that can be easily replicated, and that, as we were talking about earlier, is a push towards technology solutions or solutions that look easy, and it takes out the locally led view and the participatory inputs. And yet we know that adaptation happens at the local level, and solutions that don't consider how to bring those local perspectives and insights in are not actually going to be effective. And there's a real concern around maladaptation. So doing adaptation measures and taking the time to put those in place and then have them have unintended consequences. And so at WaterAid, we're very focused on this participatory inclusion, and whether it's PWVA in Bangladesh or our system strengthening approach that we work at in many other locations, we are very committed to a fully inclusive engagement at the very beginning of the projects that we do, and looking at how to make things sustainable across the water and sanitation system, as well as making them climate resilient and gender responsive. And it's really wonderful to hear the examples today where the inclusivity is not just gender, but it's also about disabilities, it's about ethnic minorities, it's about all of the marginalized groups that we know need access to water and sanitation services to be more climate resilient. You're muted, Adnan.
You're mute.
Sorry for that. Thank you so much, Catherine. As we go forward, it's really interesting to highlight how can we make this transparent, especially since locally led action has been a global movement for most of the communities who are we're increasingly trying to adapt and be more resilient to climate change impacts. Zobair sir, I have a question from one of the participants. What are the big challenges government is facing right now to incorporate sanitation practices with policies, appropriate sanitation practices with policies right now? And what would be your key recommendation on how to change that landscape?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question and also the participants who made it. The sanitation and as well as also water, we have committed to make it safely managed. And if we consider the sanitation is much more, what should I say, much more technical as well as financial issues are very much involved, particularly in relation to our country. We have the water and sanitation guideline policy and also strategy. And we are moving from MDG to SDGs, that's true. And in the SDGs, very much strongly it has been mentioned that safely managed sanitation by 2030. And safely managed means from the users channel to the safely managed fecal sludge management. So to this whole systems, a huge technical aspects as well as the budgetary issues are very much involved, and very much related to the ministries as well as the departments. So I would like to share one thing that we have, as many of you already know, that according to the JMP, Joint Monitoring Program, which is covered by UNICEF and WHO, that's 39% coverage is presently for safely managed sanitation. So still we have to go for another 61%, which is very much very ambitious in our case, because we have only 6 years left. So we need clearly budget allocation properly from the ministries and engaging the departments. And someone is the presentation mentioned that local government is very much need to be involved in the whole process. And the engagement of the ministries, departments, and the communities, people, they need to understand that why they need the safely managed sanitation. Because as we know, and many of you know that already Bangladesh has achieved a great success in open, free defecation free country. Now we have second generation of the commitment. So this has been covered with the involvement of the government, with the INGOs, participation of the communities, etc. Now we have need to a big push from community to the ministries and also the other stakeholders. And finally, we need to have a big investment on sanitation purposes. I think that is very important. Thank you.
Exactly. I would second that point. It's very important. And I'll just ask a follow-up question to Partho Bhai, who's working as the Director for Policy Advocacy. And then I'll follow up with Catherine afterwards. Partho Bhai, just learning from the whole experience and your experience working in Bangladesh, we have international attendees in this session as well. For them, how can we take our good examples and how can we represent that to the world? And in part, I'll ask Catherine the same question. From an international perspective, how can we more streamline sanitation practices and linkages with climate change? Partho Bhai, first you, then Catherine.
Thank you. This has been a fantastic discussions and 3 presentations by 3 highly experienced colleagues who have shown us how local actions are being implemented in country in Bangladesh, and your questions about how we take it to the world, these examples. So definitely Gobeshona is part of this, and we really want to share what we have done. with the world. So this is part of the process through which we definitely can do so. One, two. We really are sometimes, and thanks to Ruhil, and organizations like IDS, they definitely can have more collaborations with us, an organization like IDS and others and universities, and really try to, document, learn, share, the work that we do. For that, couple of things will happen. One, if we are doing good things, it's going to go outside so people can really learn from it. Two, if we are not doing so good things, or something can be improved, it has two kind of effect. One is we can learn from that process of engagement with international research organizations, that we can do better. And then the second thing that I was saying was that you really, and somebody outside the world, outside Bangladesh, or even within Bangladesh, do not really need to reinvent the wheel, because we basically would do so from that kind of interaction with the various organizations. From a WaterAid perspective, we as WaterAid definitely, we work in 28 countries, and our kind of work and word goes around in the 28 countries. So at least our good examples that we do in Bangladesh is shared within our kind of sphere, the WaterAid world in a way. But definitely we can do more to expose our work around all this to the other countries. I think the other thing which is not we really don't say much about, and even sometimes in WaterAid, probably within WaterAid Bangladesh, within the close circuit that we have, what did not go so well. It's not even about failure, or even talking about failure, and what does not work. That kind of discussion probably does not happen, in this kind of avenue, which happens between me and Adnan probably, or even between me and Zobar Bhai, or between me and Catherine, or Samia Apa. But that probably also need to be, in some shape, form, or manner, needs to be discussed also outside, so that people really get to know that somebody has tried it and it doesn't work. So no use, doing that. So may I stop there, because I can go on.
No, it's fine.
But
Thank you.
those
Thank
are the
you for
things
your
that we really can do with our information and knowledge that we have. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Patubhai. I'll come back to you, Catherine. Just from an international perspective, if you're seeing good examples from the Global South, how can we push bilaterally to make this reality a positive reality?
So I think I want to pull a little bit from what Partha just said to start off with, and what some of my earlier comments. So I was talking about how at the global level, there's such a desire to kind of do things at scale. And yet we know that that can't really happen without the local level. And so this work is so important. It's such a sort of shining beacon of what can be done and what that can look like. But we also know that you can't do it exactly the same way everywhere, right? So we have this wonderful approach, and we can see what it looks like and how it works, but we can't just assume that, like, follow these 10 steps. And I think that's exactly where Partha was bringing in, because it may be that the reason something didn't work in Bangladesh is the reason it would work in Mozambique. Or it would, because there's a slight difference in the culture. There's a slight shift here, and that reason it didn't work here is why it's going to work over here. And so it is so critical. And I know that I once went to something called a fail conference, where everyone talked about the biggest issues. And it was amazing, because you, one, felt like you weren't the only person who'd run into a challenge, but you learned from each other. So Partha, I'm with you. I would love for for something like that to happen. But I also think from an international perspective, when you run into the challenges of decision makers going, oh, well, this sounds really difficult, what we go back to them and say is, look, locally led adaptation and approaches like PWVA are giving you exactly what you're saying you need. We have decision makers saying we need more data. We need to understand that the choices that we are making to spend the funds on adaptation are the right ones. And we don't have that kind of information. And often there's a lot of feeling of, oh, we'll just use data climate modeling. And not that that modeling isn't useful, but it doesn't go down to the local level. And again, adaptation is happening at the local level. And so we can use these examples to say, we can bring to decision makers clear impacts of climate hazards at the community level. You can feel confident about taking on these recommendations. And I think that's going to be something that's going to really be of interest. And I think it also will help with one of the challenges that came out in the presentations, which is that once you've got the community on board, you've done as part of the assessment the kind of capacity building and education that you need for everyone to understand the linkages between sanitation and climate impacts and what the reasonable solutions are. You can't implement all of those solutions without any money. And so what we can do is convince decision makers to help with that funding, and not just a one-off funding, but that part of being adaptive and resilient is about getting the money to local communities more quickly. And that can't be done just at the local level because that money is coming from the international and the national level. And we need to figure out how to solve some of the gaps in getting that money to the communities so they can implement the solutions that they've identified. And
Absolutely.
I'll pause there, Adnan.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Catherine. It's always love hearing from you, and especially the last remark. Ultimately, it's how we end up helping those communities that does matter, versus absolutely learning from our failures to make sure that our approaches improve. At the same time, those communities itself, they can harness from our learning as well. Zobair sir, any last remark before I hand over to Partho Bhai for the closing remarks?
Yes, I think what just lastly mentioned by Catherine, that that community engagement and assessment, that's very important to have a evidence-based lobby and advocacy through a bottom-up approach. Because when we think about the policy change, we need to have some this type of evidence-based information, so that we can influence the policymakers in well advance, because still WASH issue are not very much interested for them, or compared to other development issues, still it is lagging behind. So in that case, this type of discussions, as Partho Bhai was mentioning, that Gobeshona definitely should take this initiative and take forward and raise this issue as much as possible to engage the policymakers and bridge between WASH sector and climate sector together. That is very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Partho Bhai, before I go to you, we have one last question from our attendees. Humaira, if you could just type in your question, or if you could turn on your, I think we don't have that option. Yeah, you have to type in your question. Okay, I think we will skip. I think she's not here. Partho Bhai, over to you. Catherine, thank you so much for your insights. Partho Bhai, if you can jump onto the closing remarks.
Oh.
And meantime, if the attendee can type in the question, we'll get back to you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
But anyway, just for the attendees, any question that you write, definitely we'll try to get back to you with your answers if we can't give it now. First of all, thank you for everybody. I still see about 55 attendees here and 11 panelists here. So part of the team who are there. So thank you to all the 55 person who are still here and listening to this conversation and very important discussions that we are having around locally led actions on water and sanitation. Thank you to Dr. Hawk, his opening remarks and his thoughts on this. Our panelist Zobar Bhai, it is always a pleasure working with you, talking with you, and having the interactions with you. We do it regularly. Catherine, your knowledge of the international climate change scenario and around local adaptation, is always wonderful to hear. Ruhil, probably I have met you once or twice while you were in Bangladesh. So thank you for your inputs. Samiyapa, as usual, you are yourself. Our colleague from Rupantar, he had just a couple of days ago, he has been a fantastic host, hosting, our UK colleagues, and the knowledge and the depth of the knowledge that he has, I think also showed today in his presentation. So thank you, everybody, for being, part of this journey that we had, for about hour and a quarter. The interesting things that I've heard, right from the beginning when Dr. Hawk was saying climate justice and loss and damage, these are things which are really dear to our hearts in a way. And under the current climate change context and the way that we feel the climate change every day of our life, particularly in the coastal belts, in the hotspots of Bangladesh, these are really, good to know and understand how those relates to sanitation. We also heard about local knowledge, how local knowledge is assisting us to respond to climate change, local adaptation, local actions through the PWVA process that WaterAid is implementing there. We heard private sector, and we understand that without the involvement of the private sector, sanitation or water at the level that we are talking about, at the grassroots, at the union Parishad level or union level, the coastal belts, this would really be impossible to really address. We talked about ground realities and coping mechanisms, how people are, coping with climate change, as best as they can. And definitely, you have seen how the PWVA process is supporting us in doing that. As I was saying, I was just, 2 days ago in the field, talking to our groups, talking to young women, who are now just becoming part of the PWVA process, trying to understand why they're, in a process like this. And there, very interesting things have come up, is that they have said they now have a voice. They now can interact with the local government institutions, i.e. the Union Parishad. They can talk to the chairman, they can talk to the members. So basically, these are all, local elected representatives of the lowest tier of the administrative body in Bangladesh. So basically, these guys, these elected representatives have power. They have the power to change people's lives. And now these young girls, or even, the people around, can have a voice and talk to them about their problems, which they didn't have that before. So this is how it's there. One of the good things, and even Zobar Bhai probably have touched upon it, but he has got extensive experience of working at the grassroots around the budgets of the local government. Bangladesh, Bangladesh government, through its act, in the Local Government Act of the Union Parishad, there is a mandate that the Union Parishad's budget has to be open and has to be consulted with the members or with the citizens, i.e. the voters of that particular area. So this is also a chance where I've seen people get an opportunity to influence the budgets. We understand that the budgets are hard to come by, but at least people have got the voice and they can demand, what is needed for them. We have, understood, and also a lot of discussions has been there around how the policy interactions can be there, and how policies and sanitation and climate change can be, intertwined, which are really great to know and see. Who are working with the government, trying to influence policies, for the betterment of the poor and the marginalized and the climate vulnerable communities that there are in Bangladesh. I think we need to have more of these kind of discussions where the youth, where the people get to know about all this and start to make their own voices and own choices about how to respond to climate change. So thank you, everybody. This has been, as I said, a wonderful experience, and about 1.5 hours time that we have spent together. Thank you for the organizers, ICANN, Gobeshona, and taking it online. The other day I was talking to Adnan, why they're really taking it online. It needs to be kind of face to face. But I believe there is also a value of online, because a lot more people around the world can learn and interact with people. So in short, thank you all for being here. Still, I see 50 people attendees, and the panelists are definitely there. So thank you all, and over to Adnan Bhai.
Thank you, Partha Bhai. Always love hearing from you. So to the attendees, if you have any follow-up questions, you can find me in the OVA app. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Samia is also there. You can directly knock her as well. Again, to our international colleagues and participants who have joined us, hopefully you'll be able to take away a bit of the learning we shared today and apply to your context. Again, if it's a failure, hopefully something we have used as a success can be used in your context. And please do share your insights with us so that we can improve our processes as well. Thank you again to everyone, especially Catherine and Ruhil. I know it's really early for you guys. Thank you, Zobar sir. Thank you, Samiha and Asad Bhai. And thank you to our ICAT colleagues. I'll conclude the session there. Thank you so much.